So thriving behind the firewall. I was talked out of a more blatant title, which was, why am I so powerful on the web and why am I so lame at work? Part of that is exactly this kind of cognitive and experiential dissonance that happens between what we feel on the web, where innovation is happening very frequently, and what we oftentimes in large organizations find behind the firewall, which is kludgy, non-intuitive, cumbersome systems to do what is very easy to do on the web. But that's kind of the backstory. Let me drill down a little deeper into the history, because that's, and what some of the things to kind of expect. So I'm going to talk about a collaboration tipping point. And in large organizations, if you're in an organization of more than 100, 150 people, it's impossible to know everybody. So how do you collaborate? How do you know what you know? As the former CEO of Hewlett-Packard once famously said, if HP only knew what HP knows, we'd be 3 times more productive. Well, if the State Department only knew what the State Department knows, we'd be closer to world peace, so it's pretty important. I'll talk a little about knowledge management versus knowledge leadership. We don't use the term knowledge management. We see that as being very 1.0. It assumes that you can get all information dragged into some gigantic database and then you go fishing for it there. It doesn't work. Many big companies have put billions of dollars trying to do it. Won't happen. And so knowledge leadership is finding information where it is when you need it, and not expecting that to be someplace. You just want it to be discoverable. I'm talking a little bit about how do you make that change in large organizations like the State Department and many kind of security-related industries, or organizations that are concerned about security. Cloud solutions really aren't an option yet. So how do you get started in this kind of collaboration movement, and how do you handle incumbents who tell you with their kludgy systems already solve the problems that you're trying to address? And finally, how do you set realistic expectations? But first, let me get a little history. So the State Department is the largest federal cabinet-level agency in the United States. So I think that Customs predated the State Department, but we're the oldest cabinet-level agency. And if you look at the idea of how do we manage and handle technology, we don't have, a great history of being on the cutting edge of technology. Frankly, we have more of a reputation of being Luddites. So when we talk about how do we move forward in this area, it's not a place where you'd expect us to have kind of be ahead of the curve. So think back 100 years ago plus to the last information technology revolution. Disruptive Technology 1.0, the telegraph. We, the State Department, were still using those wax-sealed diplomatic notes for communication, slow pigeon carry from one foreign ministry to an embassy and back, while the rest of the world kind of had leapfrogged into using this disruptive technology. Our lack of adoption had some pretty negative effects. We talked about a couple of world wars that happened with changes. So jump forward, 100 years. Did we learn anything? Had we learned from this lack of having caught the wave earlier in an earlier technological revolution? So while you or your friends or parents or somebody was geeking out over a Bondi Blue iMac, what were we doing in the State Department? Had we learned? Not so much. You may remember Wang computers. We kept them alive for more than 3 years. They were in Chapter 11, but we had a large installed base that they continue to serve, and so if you have any friends that kind of trailed off their careers with Wang, you can thank the State Department for that. So our tipping point, what changed for us? There were 3 big important disasters, major failures. One was 9/11, the other prior to that, our 9/11, the State Department, were the East Africa embassy bombings. And the third was a very kludgy, hierarchical command and control, knowledge management 1.0 attempt to address this information, inability to share information, which failed miserably. And then Secretary of State Colin Powell said, look, let's just try to put an office together that gets the end users into the IT decision-making process. Don't leave it to the techies. Let the end users have a voice. And that is how eDiplomacy was born just about 10 years ago. So when you talk about a collaboration tipping point, what I like to focus on is somebody using a tool too much? Now you go to most organizations and what you find is everybody's got a hammer, which they want, is a tool they want to use for everything. And that hammer is called email. So they're driving screws into the table with their email hammer. And it's because either there aren't other tools available or people haven't socialized how to use other tools that are available. So, you ask anybody in any organization, given dozens of talks, how many people are getting too few emails? Who wants more emails? Raise your hand if you want more emails. Nobody. Why? It's because people are jamming everything into that chain. It's like the freeway on rush hour. If there were other ways to get to where you wanted to get, and you knew how to use those other pathways, you do it. Well, that's kind of what we do, is develop and then socialize those other pathways. So again, I mentioned earlier knowledge management, that hierarchical command and control. Let's make sure somebody's in control of all the information. They create a place where it can sit, and then everybody goes to get it. The problem is nobody ever puts any information there. They become these gigantic ghost towns because people are not going to take a step beyond their normal workflow to push information to some sacred place. Even if the president of the or CEO of the organization says you have to do it, people aren't going to do it unless there's some kind of it's tied to compensation, and so they don't work. How many of you love SharePoint? Raise your hands if you love SharePoint. Raise them high. All those SharePoint lovers, raise them high. Okay, exactly. So when I talk about, the incumbents are going to say, you're thinking about these collaborative platforms. We already have it. It's called SharePoint. It's great. It does everything you want to do. It's got wikis. It's got profiles. All that stuff you're talking about. It's there. It's there. It's just great. You don't need it anymore. Well, obviously it doesn't work, right? So the trick is when you're trying to get this collaborative environment, you've got to go to the end user and find out what their needs are and find out what they're not doing. And if they're not using the tool, then if something requires a lot more training for people to use, it's broken, right? So getting started, the key for kind of, we think of ourselves as kind of an insurgent group. What's been crucial for us is that we've got roots. So we were established by the Secretary of State. We, in the statute and organization of the State Department, we have a place, and that's crucial in showing the permanence and the ability for us to build things that will be there tomorrow and the next day. So I mentioned earlier kind of cloud versus behind the firewall. So that for many organizations, that's a big decision. We in the State Department are not anywhere near kind of embracing cloud-based solutions. We still have to build something, have it on our servers behind the firewall. The security's too big an issue. In government, I think most of government, that's still the case. Certainly anybody who's dealing with security or law enforcement, that's certainly the case. So where to start? So I'm a big believer in pain points. Find somebody who is just so clearly frustrated, or there's, the person that's pulling out their hair, the person who looks like they're going to go postal. How can you go to them and say, let's describe your problem. Let's not start from the solution side. Let's describe what is your problem. Why do you have higher blood pressure when you come to work? Why are you pulling your hair out? Why do you, people check to make sure you're not bringing a gun to work? There's something happening that's making you unhappy. What is that? Now, can we do something that will, lower your blood pressure a little? And we kind of identify those pain points, solve them. Those people then become our advocates. So we have, again, this kind of insurgent, bottoms-up kind of guerrilla approach to addressing these challenges. So when we think about we think of a suite of tools that we've developed and platforms that we've used that are all simple. I mean, they're very simple, easy to use, but we've developed kind of the right tool for the right problem. So if you think of email is this hammer that people are driving screws in with. How can we help socialize to people? What is this information used for? Is it something that is is an evolving persistent knowledge, then a wiki's great. So, and I'll give you some examples. I'll show you other examples, but you can see procedures, things that evolve, but they don't change dramatically. So things that are often in large organizations are memorialized in a PDF, which, you have to go through the whole clearance process to get the new PDF put up. So they're almost always out of date. The information's stale. People go, oh, who's going to update this? Well, I don't know. Who put it up there? I don't know. So people look at it, but they don't know who can change it. Well, with a wiki, anybody can change it. So I'll show some examples of the successes. So we have an internal wiki in the State Department called Disruptive. It's got 15,000 plus articles, about 5,000 active contributors, about 45,000 page views a week. And what we've done is we've found those pain points. So desk officers. In the State Department, the desk officer is kind of like the company rep. Somebody who's a sales rep servicing a certain, district or certain demographic or a certain group of companies. And those desk officers, oftentimes it's the first tour, the first time somebody, when they serve back in Washington, it's their first job. So they've served overseas at a couple of embassies, 4 years in the Foreign Service, but always overseas in a smaller embassy. They come back to Washington, and now they're the desk officer for country X, which means they are the traffic cop for information that comes from the embassy of country X to the State Department, as well as information that comes from our embassies back to the State Department. So they're, keep that information flow, manage issues. They're really often kind of like a traffic cop. But there's a ton of things that they need to know about that they don't know anything about until they need to use it. But the problem is these jobs people turn over every 2 years. That's Foreign Service officers change jobs every 2-3 years. So you don't have a lot of human institutional memory in the office. What do? Deskipedia. It was a beautiful effort to kind of capitalize or crystallize that information in a place that could constantly be updated. Anybody can go and update it. Something changes, a new person's there, they moved the office, procedures changed, anybody can go and update it. And you think about it, so again, the State Department is very hierarchical, command and control culture, right? When a cable, some of you've heard of cables, they come out of like, WikiLeaks, you might have read about them. Anyway, cables, when a cable leaves an embassy and comes to the State Department, it is signed at the bottom by the ambassador. When it leaves the State Department and goes to embassies, it's signed at the bottom by the Secretary of State. So very hierarchical, right? So in that organization, we set up this wiki where the newest newbie could go put something else up there that could be read by anyone. I mean, that's pretty revolutionary. And so we set up a very kind of stringent procedure for how you make corrections, and if there were conflicts over information, how we would, very elaborate system. We've never had to, arbitrate anything. People are grown-ups, and they're not going to go and mess with something for the sake of messing with it. So it's become, as I said, very effective. Other examples, the collaborative management initiative. So how do we manage our embassies? We've got 260 plus consulates and embassies around the world, and obviously the embassy in London has a lot more resources and people than our embassy in Conakry. But there are some things that 80% of the embassies should be able to do 80% of the time. So it's kind of not the best of the best and not the least common denominator, but that kind of sweet spot that everybody should be able to do. That was established by embassies, and that's the Collaborative Management Initiative. So if you show up at an embassy and you go, what's the newest innovation in running a motor pool? You can go here and you can find out as people innovate in that area that kind of fits in that what 80% of the embassies can do 80% of the time, you'll find it. So again, it can be updated by anyone, anytime. Very useful and one of the most highly sought after or most visited sites. Another, and this is a really important thing about wikis, and I think it's a challenge with government in general, is the world on the outside is, I think it's like spinning like a car engine. It's going 3,000, 5,000 RPMs, and government, the wheels of your car at a stop sign. right? They're not moving at all. So how do you sync between this world that's moving quickly and this government which is slow to kind of, gain momentum? Wikis provide that opportunity. So the great example of that was after the, January 2010 earthquake in Haiti. Tons of things were happening on the outside. Some really fascinating things about kind of collaboration among people who ended up saving tens if not, or hundreds if not thousands of lives, done by people on the outside collaborating and syncing up. How could we stay on top of that? Well, we had our wiki page where people could throw up all that information. Anybody could go in and add it, add links, change links, add new information. And actually, the use of Disruptive tripled that week. I mean, it became kind of the go-to place within the State Department for collaboration and sharing. Okay, so that we talk about wikis, which are kind of content or evolving persistent knowledge. The next, if you move to a more conversational information sharing, then it's blogs, simple blog-based software. So we have nearly 80 multi-author blogs in the State Department. And it's a place where you can have kind of content with conversation. And we found some really good uses of these. One is replacing newsletters. Why on earth would you ever want to send out a newsletter if you could have a blog, right? A newsletter is frozen in time. It's this little block frozen in amber that you send out every week or twice, 2 weeks. It sits in people's email inbox unless they save it to a file, in which then it sits in their file. And nobody else can find it. So the new person comes in and is pinch hitting for somebody who's out sick. They don't have access to it. You have it in a blog, it's archivable, searchable, you can have RSS feeds on issues that you subscribe to things that you're interested in. And so replacing newsletters, we had a great example also, there's rumor control. So there's a part of the State Department that had historically always been in one building. Its culture was kind of bound to the building. It was time for them to move to another building. So it was one of these kind of socially disrupting processes, and people projected a lot of things onto that move. So there were a lot of rumors roiling around. So we put up a website, a blog on that, Home Suite Annex. You're moving from Annex, 27 now to Annex 5. What are your concerns? Put it up there. And then you'd have subject matter experts respond to it. But you can squash rumors with fact. And the other thing is Secretary Clinton realized that there was this kind of angst around the move. And she said, look, people are so concerned about, I want to be there the first day to shake their hands when they come into the building. So she was there the morning, opening day, greeting people to come to the new building. So again, it helps uncover things that you wouldn't see otherwise and address them. It's also one of the things that we've worked with the World Bank on this, and they found tremendous benefits of crossover commonalities. So you've got a community that deals with people who bike to work. And you find that there's another person who bikes to work, and you also find that you have something in common with your work, although you're working in different geographic regions. So you bond over this external work commonality, or you meet each other, and that has benefits and spill over into the workplace as well. It's also a way to humanize leadership. You can give a voice to typical blogs, and it's also, I'll show you an example of this, on-ramp for people who tend not to play in these spaces. So one example is our embassy in Mongolia, small embassy. This is their kind of face to the interagency community. So information's there. Anybody can come into it. Again, if this were in some kind of static form, somebody from FAA who was dealing with the region and went on maternity leave, and somebody came in to pinch hit for her, would be able to come to this and see all the historic information, read up quickly. Another is social media hub. So how the use of social media, it's different in the State Department or in an embassy or a government agency than it is on the web. What are some of the do's and don'ts? What are good things that other embassies are doing? What are tricks that you could learn? All of this can be funneled through one central location. There's even a 23 things challenge where people can go in there and step by step kind of go from absolutely not knowing anything about social media to, here's a challenge, set up your own blog, set up your own, go to a wiki, edit a wiki. Very simple step-by-step, 23-step process, which they can go through themselves and go from being, a digital, become a digital native or quasi-digital native. So I talked about the on-ramp for the voiceless. So you want a bar bet, to win a free beer or a glass of wine. Ask, somebody, what percentage of State Department employees do you think are not U.S. citizens? That's the majority. The majority of our employees are not U.S. citizens. They're host country nationals working in our embassies and consulates around the world. And they weren't playing on these platforms that we had developed. They weren't collaborating. They didn't feel kind of like it was their space. So we created a community just for them. First day, over 1,000 people came and made comments, and it was organizationally tremendously empowering. So, if I'm, pretend I am a locally employed staff at a small West African U.S. embassy. And I look around, I come to work and I look around and I see, wow, there's another half dozen people who are like me, have advanced degrees and speak great English as well as the local language, and that's my peer group. I come to this community and I put up a comment, and the next day somebody from Turkey and somebody else from Buenos Aires and somebody else from South Africa comment on it. And my world goes from having 6 peers to having 6,000 peers. The potential for our ability to tap into this network by networking them is tremendous. So I'll get in later into the idea of microtasking and how we could take this even further. So ideation. We set up a platform called the Secretary's Sounding Board, which starts with my idea is, and there's some constraints to, it's not about policy, it's about the how, not the what of diplomacy. But in about 2.5 years, almost 3 years now, we've had about 2,600 ideas put up. We've had more than 17,000 comments on those ideas. And many dozens of ideas that have been implemented, not because of any top-down fiat, but because the person with the idea and the person who could implement the idea and the person who could improve the idea all found each other. So turning water cooler conversation into action. The trick is follow through. So there is some cynicism when people say, wait, this is a Secretary Sounding Board, but why doesn't the Secretary say my idea is great and they should put some money behind it and we should implement it? I mean, 500 people have already voted it up, so that means it should be good. So there's a challenge there, like the drawing suggests. One of our more, just about a year ago, we launched an internal kind of LinkedIn. So again, you think of the State Department, finding the person who is an econ officer and speaks Urdu, you should be able to find that right away, right? But we can't. I mean, you go to HR and they're kind of the guardians of that information, and well, why are you asking, and who's asking for it, and that's personnel, that's sensitive. So social allows that to be possible. You have just like in LinkedIn, if you want to find the person who works at Spigot, or how many degrees of separation is there between somebody and somebody who works at Spigot? Well, through LinkedIn you can find that. We wanted to offer that same kind of experience here at the State Department, and we've launched it. I think I've got so these are examples. Obviously, industry's already decided this is key value, very valuable. Booz Allen Hamilton and IBM have been doing this for years. So we launched this just about a year ago. In that time, we've got about 10,000 users out of a base of, we figure, maybe 45,000 potential users. So it's not bad. There's an opt-in, so there's no, it's not something you have to do, and it's been a pretty steady growth. And you see some of the things that caused a bounce in our, so we actually even put an article in our internal in-house organ, the magazine, to get the people who are offline, people who read paper. We wanted to let them know about it as well. And it obviously got a big bump when Secretary Clinton did a video introducing it. So this is what it looks like. I mean, it's the kind of key feature is, what are you working on? Not who did you have coffee with this morning, or who's your favorite, who you think should have won on American Idol, but what are you working on now? And what we find is people triangulate on problems, and somebody who's worked on the same challenge at another place can give a part of the solution. Somebody else can then add value on that, and you get this kind of crowdsourced collaboration among people who don't know each other. You get other kind of benefits. You go to a meeting and you want to sit next to the person who's, from the legal office, but you don't know who the person from the legal office is. Well, if you know the distribution list and you know the name of that person, you can, if they're on corridor, you can look them up and then see them when they come in. Or the person that you've been arguing with over some, treaty issue, you can look them up and find the humanizing kind of what do you have in common. Oh, we're both from Oregon. I didn't know that. Well, let's talk about Oregon instead of the treaty the next time we meet. It's a way to make business, take the friction. Whether you need more friction, it provides friction. If you need more grease, it provides the grease. It's the humanizing side to it. Microtasking, I'm really big on this. So many of you know Mechanical Turk? Y'all kind of up on that? Okay, there's so many of these discrete tasks that we do that we have to do on a short deadline where we don't have the local expertise, whether it's an embassy or in an office within the State Department. So we launched the Virtual Student Foreign Service Microtasking platform in conjunction with the Robertson Foundation for Government. And we're using Sparked by the Extraordinaries. Do any of you know that platform? It's a microtasking platform that's, its biggest users are kind of Fortune 500 companies that want to be able to track their employees' volunteer time, doing online volunteering to support NGOs and nonprofit organizations. So we've taken that white label and repurposed it to be able to provide, instead of NGOs, we have offices and embassies in the State Department, and instead of corporate volunteers, we have university students in the United States. And simply put, if you can describe it precisely, put it up there, the students then work on it. They get their kind of thumbs up points, get a leaderboard among the students. People gain expertise as they do more tasks better, and it gives kind of beauty from the State Department and the U.S. government, or frankly U.S. society's perspective, is that it allows kids in schools for whom an unpaid summer internship at the State Department or at a U.S. embassy is just not part of their reality. I mean, they work for the summer, they go to a community college, they got to help out at home. There's no reason they shouldn't be exposed and have an opportunity to understand what diplomacy is about and contribute to it. So it's very democratizing as well as being very effective for us. Prediction markets, do you know about prediction markets? Is that something? Are you interested in it at all? I think it's something that would be spot on for the State Department. So prediction market is, you ask kind of a time-bound, measurable question. Will we finish our embassy in country X by date Y? So you have hundreds, hundreds of people who are working on that project, each with a little optic into something that could go wrong with that, right? So if the percent that say yes starts to track up or down, it's telling you there's something, this mass of people knows something. Maybe no individual would ever put their finger on it, but as a group, that something's going off the rails, and you can start to act and respond to it quicker. So prediction markets, they work, they're awesome, they're fantastic, but we brought in an expert from George Mason who's worked with Hewlett-Packard on this, and he said, but technically they're not hard. The hard part is to get leadership to ask questions that they're willing to be surprised and maybe even embarrassed by what their employees think. So, you think of the universe of things you could ask, and then you add that factor, and it becomes a micro dot. So I don't think we'll see this anytime soon at the State Department, but I'm always looking for somebody who, in leadership who's willing to take the risk. This is a really important point. I get this all the time from my 13-year-old son who says, Dad, you're always reading. Why do you waste your time reading? If you really want to learn something, just get a video. A video will teach you quicker. And he's right. If my goal is to learn how to do something, I'm going to learn it probably quicker, faster, better, and right. Using videos. And we, in the State Department, our coin of the realm is knowledge and information. And if we're not using videos and we're not becoming literate in how we exchange information, share information, we're going to fall behind. And the only way to do that is to have a place to park those videos, to be able to link to those videos, and to have people, give us a thumbs up if we're doing well. The same with images. So this is just some kind of last thoughts on what it's taken for us to do. A really big part is reverse mentorship. So, oftentimes in organizations like the State Department, you're hierarchical, and there's a big thing about, senior people have to mentor the junior people. And I tell, every time I go in to talk to, new ambassadors or new deputy ambassadors, I say, turn the tables when it comes to technology. Ask your mentee to help explain to you why you should care about this stuff. Why does it matter? Why would you care? Why do you need to use it? And how can it help you get your work done better? How can it help you let go of your hammer of the email inbox and actually use some of these other tools to get things done? There's my info, and so there's a little way, if you want to give me a shout out, here's a place to do it, and if at least one person doesn't do it, then my boss won't believe I was here, so. Thank you.
Hi, how is the democratizing influence of these communities affecting the culture?
I think, so the question is, how does the democratizing influence of these tools impact the culture? And I'm a big champion, but I'm also a realist. And, culture eats strategy for lunch. I think it was Drucker said that. And culture moves slowly. So I think that there's pockets within the organization that have embraced these tools and are doing a great job and have, solved pain points using them. But for every 2 steps forward, there's 1 step back. There's somebody who comes into an embassy that has some great product and says, what is this? This isn't how we do business. We do cables. We write cables. That's our coin of the realm. That's the thing that we do. So actually, we're working on a new product, which we're not even in alpha on. But the idea is to add conversations around the cables. So cables are as static as they can get, but to have a conversation around the cables among the people who are authorized to see those cables. So to add a social component to this very old school tool.
What are the pockets that have sort of embraced?
So Consular Affairs is pretty good. So Consular Affairs has they have a good organizational culture, and they also, knowledge is really important. So if you're at a consulate in a small embassy or a small consulate, you've got one person maybe who has to do the job of, or covers the issues that maybe 5 or 6 people would cover in a large embassy. There's no way you can know all the things those people know. So it provides a way to have this kind of social information sharing in real time among people who have more expertise and the person who's just being stretched too thin and couldn't possibly know all of that. So that's one good example.
I like the way that you described the divide that the firewall brings. Basically, you have your employees, and then you have everybody on the outside. And you also described how knowledge management, e-learning, whatever you want to call them, systems can be set up either internally or they can be set up in the cloud, outside, software as a service, whatever. Have you seen any systems besides the one that you described that was directed at student volunteers that sort of bridge the gap between the employees and people on the outside so they can collaborate on equal footing?
Yeah. So it's a huge nut to crack, and something that it's where old regulations catch up slowly with technology. Regulations drag way behind technology, and so there are pretty stiff regulations on it if you're going to have an advisory board. If you're going to have an advisory board, all the members of the advisory board need to be published. There has to be a Federal Register notice of when they're going to meet. It has to be clear that there's no conflict of interest. It's pretty tedious. And today, though, why can't we have a quora for government? Where you could have a platform where people could share expertise. And there have been efforts to kind of do that, but we're still at the very kind of first steps, and part of it is kind of technology is sprinting, and we're kind of regulations and laws obviously move at a much slower pace. So. in those gray spaces in that emerging technology, it's often difficult to be the first mover. Bill?
You talked about the situation where you go from having 6 peers to 6,000 peers. And I'm wondering what negative things you learned about that and what you could do about them, because with 6 people you can check in with them every day, and with 6,000 you could spend your whole day checking in with people. There could be, you could post a question and get 1,000 answers, and what problems arose when you increase the scale?
So people are pretty, there are a lot of kind of old school folks who say, this is just a waste of time. This is a complete waste. If people, anybody who's doing a lot of comments on there, it's obviously that they don't have enough work, we should do more work to do. Not saying that this is a valid place to do work. So since there is that bias among leadership, senior leadership, people aren't playing around there. I mean, they're not, and especially since it's open to absolutely everybody. And they're more likely to do that with email, where at least, it's not open to everybody. So, they're more likely to kind of find that. So people are doing work on these spaces, and it's more convincing the managers that when people are doing work here, it's as valid, maybe even more valid than if they're doing it with email. So, but there's no abuse. I mean, that's not been a problem.
My question is about the future. Do you do any vision work for your division for eDiplomacy? And another question is, do you have any role models from other parts of the world, like from Europe, or do you talk to other state departments? Thanks.
Sure. So the first was on vision, like our future kind of. Yeah. So actually, our office did do. The bureau I work in, this is kind of a unique thing, which I think it's worked well for us, which is I report up to the CIO. So I'm actually in the IT world. Although I'm an econ officer, foreign service officer, we have people who are in our office who are consular officers, management officers, political officers, and public affairs officers. So we're not all geeks. We're not afraid of geeks, and we're not afraid of technology, but we're kind of embody the end user, hopefully. And so one of the things that we did for our bureau, which is the IT bureau, was to look at where will we be in 2020, and to get there, what do we need to do? And the kind of the core nut of that, the argument that we made is, since our bureau historically has been technicians, people who make sure that the machines were in per and that the systems are going, and people call you when they have a problem with their computer. What we said is the future of IT is IT as a service, and so more things are going to be virtualized, more things will be done using thin clients and other things which will allow, you won't need as many physical people taking care of physical things in an embassy. But will the need for technological guidance disappear? No. And so the argument we make is that our IT organization should make that kind of same transformation that IBM made, from being a mainframe manufacturer to being a technology service company. And so we kind of guided the path. And we said the crucial part of this is, how do we attract, recruit, hire, train, maintain, and reward the people who have these soft skills, which will be more in demand in the future. So we've got plenty of people who are technicians who, if they're extroverted, they look at your shoes when they talk. And if they're introverted, they look at their own shoes. There's plenty of folks like that. What we need more of are the people who work with the soft skills and can serve as, can have a seat at the table when technology either can help the outcome. So how do we achieve a diplomatic outcome where technology can serve as a conduit or an accelerator for that? Or how can we, in the case of what we're doing here, how can we do our jobs better using technology? And those are both service approaches rather than kind of technician approaches. Sorry, then the second question was? Oh, yeah. So there's actually an article, if you can Google it, I think it's called Revolution, @state, and it's, the rise of eDiplomacy. And it was done by a think tank in Australia, basically kind of saying what we're doing in the State Department is kind of a model for other foreign ministries. And frankly, I've been invited to go talk to, Nike, the World Bank, International Finance Corporation, and, they're not ahead of us. I mean, they want to learn from us because we had this kind of lucky bad luck of the embassy bombings and 9/11 that put us ahead of the curve. So we started kind of struggling with these 10 years ago. A lot of large organizations have started to struggle more recently with this, and being the first mover advantage is great.
Well, I was about to ask if you could speak a little bit about getting the resources together to create a wiki in the first place, and how did you get buy-in from leadership to do it? I guess you started to answer some of the question, and that there were world events happening.
Yeah.
Maybe you didn't, need to convince a lot of people.
But actually, on Diplompedia, there's a great article. So again, Google it. It's called Diplompedia. Well, if you just put Diplompedia, Bronk, B-R-O-N-C or B-R-O-N-K, it'll take you to a Rice University paper that was delivered at a AAAS conference that talks about how we did that. So
all right.
I don't want to steal Chris and Tiffany's thunder since they did all the great work on the paper. But really it was kind of being ahead of, having to kind of, the first one's always hard. So, and so you have to kind of go through a lot of extra hurdles to kind of get the first one done. The other thing is like massive, wild inclusion. So everybody you think is going to have a problem with what you're doing, invite them to the table from day one. So we did this one with Corridor, where we knew that a lot of people would be concerned about it for a lot of reasons, and we brought them all in a room. We spent 2 hours going over, here's our wireframes, this is what we'd like to do, this is the functionality we'd like to have. We got everybody's concern, we noted their concern, we said we're going to have working groups to move this forward, we want them to participate in all these working groups. In the end we said, if we can bake in solutions to your concerns, does anybody think we shouldn't go forward? Well, I mean, way too often in government, people want to do stealth mode. They think, we'll just get the thing done before the people who are, who don't like it find out about it. And we are just the opposite. We figure we can make a better product if we can get the people who we know are going to be against it to at least have their challenges addressed.
But you have to take a little bit of a cowboy approach to it in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
You personally have to commit to, this is an awesome thing,
Yep.
and we need to launch this.
Yep.
And so I guess I'm wondering how much of that you had to do in parallel to the niceties of inclusion, trying to get buy-in, but knowing that, hey, we're
No, so we have a great culture. So our office, we've got a guy in our office who's worked for 5 different federal agencies. And he said he's never seen anything else like our office anywhere in the federal government, which, it's very much kind of startup mentality of, it doesn't have to be perfect, launch and iterate, ask the end user, don't guess what the end user is going to want before you do it, put it out there, get them in a dialogue, add the features that they request. And
I had a few questions. So one is, how do you gauge the success of your projects?
Yeah, that's a great one. So it's a really crucial and important question that we up until just about a year ago when I said, we've got the analytics for Diplompedia because it runs on MediaWiki, so you got MediaWiki analytics, and we've got for our communities, we've got the WordPress, and since we did Corridor on BuddyPress, we can use those, and then we've got Search, which has different analytics, and we can't do cross-platform analytics. So I said, let's figure out what's the best analytic platform that we can use that will allow us to do these analytics and use the virtual student foreign service. So I laid out all the platforms that we wanted to be able to do analytics across. I put all of our systems, constraints. So, for instance, we don't have a LAMP stack. We've got to run on a .NET environment. So did all of that and had this PhD student in computer science at, University of Maryland. Because like tough decisions, if you could find yourself standing at the point where you had all the information you needed and you had to decide which direction to go, that's easy, right? The hard part is being back here and you're saying, there's like a whole bunch of unknowns between me and that decision point. And people will oftentimes spend months and even years standing, wondering how they cross that morass between where they are and here. Well, I laid out the constraints, gave it to this guy. He came back 2 weeks later with, a 20-slide deck that would put McKinsey to shame because it was like everything you wanted to know with not with 200 pounds of like BS kind of sandwiched around it. And we made our decision. It was awesome. It was incredible.
And my second question is, are there any particular software platforms that you would either recommend because you've had really good experiences with them, or ones that you would say to avoid?
So, we haven't used that much. We embrace open source. One of the things I say when you talk about money, I say thankfully we didn't have a big budget. If we had a big budget, we would have gotten some adult bandit to create some kludgy system, proprietary system for us that would have been a bucket of spaghetti, and we would have failed miserably. So we didn't. We had a couple of people who knew just enough to kind of get us started, and we kind of cobbled together and grew the team as we needed. And so, we actually started with movable type because that was kind of the blog platform of the day. We bent it in a way that was unrecognizable to do the ideation platform. We actually had one of the founders of Six Apart, and we showed him it, and he said, "No way in hell that is movable type." We said, "Yep, that's what's behind it." And then we actually had to. It didn't have the analytics. It didn't have a lot of the features and functionality that we needed. So we went with Bright Idea, which is kind of a proprietary. It's a contract. We contract out for that, and then also our search. We use but everything else is open source. Mm-hmm. So
cool.
But we didn't go with Drupal or Elk because we went with BuddyPress because it was more turnkey. Yep.
Cool.
How do you deal with the veracity of the information? I would imagine that's really critical.
Yep. Yep. So what we do is we say, not necessarily the authoritative answer. So we say, this is a wiki. So if you know it's wrong, then you change it. And so, but we can clearly say this is not necessarily the authoritative answer, but it is easily accessible and anybody can change it. So where the PDF that you see that's kind of frozen in amber from God knows when somebody put it up there, is it correct or not? Well, it was authoritative, 11 months ago when it was put up. Is it still authoritative? Well, only if I can go back 11 months in time, right? So which is better? So we argued upon giving the caveat, this is not necessarily the authoritative source, but it's easy to edit and it's easily accessible.
So I've got a couple of questions, and I'm still trying to figure out how to word them. So I guess the first one is sort of building off your question. When you're working with these networks of people across so many different, job functions, so many different geographies, just such a huge user group of virtual strangers. Are there kind of issues of sort of trust in terms of the information and the communication that you have to overcome? And I'll ask the second one later, but just this one for now.
So trust is always a challenge, and it's something that you build up over time. But I think what it does is it adds components, the human components that are part of trust. So if you only have an email relationship with somebody, after doing 10 emails that the person responds quickly and that the information they give you is good. You don't know much about them, but if you also can add that kind of human context to it, you might get to that trust sooner than if you just did it through the kind of sterile information exchange.
Well, I guess, sorry.
But then the other is kind of, but one point is, so the trick of, of slicing things more narrowly so that I know I'm with people who share the same functionality and the same area of expertise, whether it's geographic or kind of subject matter. And that's where these kind of, communities come in. So whether it's people who bike to work or people who are looking at the influence of China in Africa. I mean, there's people who kind of say, I fit in one of those groups or I don't. And if I do, I can jump in and be part of that conversation. And we also, so the sounding board, the other thing what we found is sounding board is gigantic. So it covers everything from, wet hours next to the bike rack so that more people would bike in, which we did, and doubled bike to work. Two people, who have kind of completely different interests in areas. So what we've done is we've done these kind of time-restricted, narrower challenges where it challenges people to address something that's very within a small cohort. So supply chain management improvements. So, there's 200 people who care about supply chain management in the State Department. And by narrowing a conversation and kind of solving challenges within that, you get a lot more interest and you get a lot more enthusiasm and you get people to respond and people want to be, the best subject matter or the person with the best idea among that cohort. So.
Okay, and then my second question is kind of a multi-part one as well. So it looks like, the software that you're referencing that you've been using is, I guess it's pretty well established and it's well sort of vetted in terms of its efficacy. You have blogs and you have wikis, and I'm wondering if are there situations coming up where you feel like you need to create new software to address a new need? And then building on top of that, how do you even identify sort of what these needs are that you need to address? Is it things that you see that you go out and you find, or is it things that people come to you with that you then sort of address after the fact?
Yeah. So again, the earlier point about pain points is to say, what is the pain point? And so there's some things that we could address and some things we can't. And we have kind of understanding of things beyond what we manage, and so we also can point people to other resources. But they're, there is a challenge when you think about inside a large organization where security is really important. Bringing new software onto the network is a Herculean, Sisyphean task. So it's not like you can kind of find the newest, greatest thing and say, oh yeah, let's just pull that on the network. The IT configuration control board, they'll give us thumbs up right away. So there really has to be a strong case. I mean, there's a reason why we don't have a LAMP stack yet behind the firewall. So finding kind of new software, it's usually, it's very rare, frankly, even that in our small team, that we're actually doing some, lightweight coding. Most of the stuff we do is contracted out, so even if it's people doing it inside, they're contractors who are doing it, and it's rare for us to have actual people who are doing it ourselves, not kind of as a system approach.
Anyone else?
If I understand correctly, at the beginning you told that the need for information sharing came from those big disasters.
It became clear that the thing in the watchword of the Cold War in diplomacy was need to know. Keep information siloed, buttoned down, in the drawer where it belongs, because the big bad Soviet bear's out there trying to identify pieces, weave them together, and figure out our secrets, right? So that was the watchword. Well, the Cold War ended and we kind of drifted, and then 9/11 hit, and we realized that need to know, which worked great in the Cold War, was crippling us in this post-9/11 era, where we couldn't weave together these pieces of information and identify threats and vulnerabilities. So it was clearly a mandate post-9/11 that the government learn how to share information better, and we saw it as a whole cultural change.
And my question is, then another disaster strike of much smaller scale, Wiki. What have we learned from that, which shows that if you have too much information, too easy to share, things like Wiki will happen?
So, my personal take is that, frankly, our platforms, so that didn't happen in the State Department, that happened in another agency. And I would argue, I think defensively, that having these kind of platforms where you have a whole bunch of little pressure valves where people have a place to vent, to share ideas, to find other commonalities, versus, if you screw down all of those, you're more likely to get somebody exploding and doing something wildly stupid and illegal like happened with WikiLeaks. So I actually see our platforms as the kind of anti-WikiLeaks. So that's my take.
All right. Thank you so much.